Welcome to Wonders and Miracles podcast, where we celebrate miraculous moments in everyday lives. I'm Liza Lawrence. I'm glad to have you join me as we celebrate wonders and miracles together. All right, well, I'm here with Alison today from Toronto, and she's going to share an experience that happened in 2003 when she became sober, and she was going through AA and had an incredible mystical spiritual experience that was life-changing for her. So I'm excited to hear the details of this story and to share this with you. And Alison, thank you for submitting this story, and tell us what happened.
Thank you for having me on your fantastic podcast. So I was a big old drunk for many years, super drunk, super messed up. And I didn't really realize the gravity of my situation. Although my life was chaos, I didn't really understand how truly terrible it really was until one night when I almost died. So I had mixed a bunch of things together and took them all at once in a spirit of exuberance, as was my custom. And I woke up many hours later after that experience, and I wasn't able to move. And I could tell that my respiration was very compromised. Like I had to struggle and concentrate just to be able to get the breath come in and out.
Wow.
And I think I'd probably come close to that sort of thing before, but I wasn't so aware of it as I was this time, because there was a great distance in time from between when I took that stuff until when I opened my eyes again. And so I lay there on that bed.
And can I ask, were you all alone? Were you at a party?
I had a roommate at the time. We were living in a motel together because we didn't have any money, and it just was really pretty rock bottomy. Although I didn't really notice, because it's like you're living under a spell. Like an evil wizard has cast a spell on you and you can't see what's happening. It just feels very unlucky. But this was the beginning of the breaking of that spell. I mean, maybe not the very beginning. There were hints before, but I just didn't accept it in lots of ways. My doctor was like, something's wrong here. And I'm like, it's very nice of you to think of me that way, but I really just have to go to a lot of parties, right? Like I genuinely believe that's what it was. Turns out I was wrong about that. So yeah, I mix all this stuff together. We're in this motel room. And so my roommate is asleep in the opposite bed to me when I was kind of waking up from this. And I knew I'd come really close. And I had a very strange sense of knowing in that moment that I've had a few times in my life, but not very often. And the knowing was that I had about 6 months to a year if I didn't stop.
Wow.
I just was sure about that. And I thought about my family and how devastated they would be to know that I had just died from something so stupid.
Yeah.
So, and I felt it was like cold and clammy feeling in a way. Like just everything about it was pretty terrifying. But the worst part by far of this experience, and none of that, of course, is a picnic, but the worst part of it was knowing that I had wasted every moment of my time here on earth. Everything I had done was for my own pleasure. And I had done nothing with my time here. And it was the most profound regret. And I vowed to myself in that moment that I would never, ever have this experience again. I'm not going to get to my deathbed for the second time and look back with pure, unadulterated regret because I had wasted everything.
Wow.
So I thought, okay, I knew that the alcohol had to go primarily because it was that made me do anything, right? If I have one drink, I have like 10. And like, I'll just take whatever comes my way. I have no control over that. I've been trying to control it 100 different ways. Never worked. So I knew, but it's hard because alcohol is like the most beautiful love of your life that you must say goodbye to and close the door on forever and resign yourself to never having a moment's fun in the rest of your life forever and ever. And I thought, well, I'd rather live like that than die. So
Wow.
I'm going to accept that I'll never have another moment's fun in my life. And I'll just go to AA as, like, I think that's what alcoholics do, right? That's what I was putting together at that time. So I let myself kind of fall back asleep. And then when I woke up again later, I told my roommate, and she was like, whoa. And she's like, okay, I think I know a meeting where you can go to. And so when I could move properly again, which was the next day, I went. And so I found myself in this church basement with all these other people that are just like me. And I remember learning about what the steps were, but I also remember crying. And so they ask you if anybody has like a desire to stop drinking just for that day. And I didn't know what to do. So I just put my hand up. And the crazy guy at the front of the meeting was like, well, come on up here, darling. And so I came up in the audience, all the people there just burst into applause. And somehow through that burst of applause, I felt the love
Mm.
all these other alcoholics. And I knew in that moment, I'm like, yep, this is it.
Wow.
Things are changing. So I left that meeting with my little handful of pamphlets, and I was like, okay, doing this thing. I'm going to just throw myself right in there, just like how alcoholics do everything, right? Like they're
Right.
just full on or full off. So I was full on for this program. And I understood about the first step, which is powerless over your substance. If you're about to die, it's pretty powerless.
Yes.
Right? So I came to the second step, and so the experience really happened about 4 or 5 days after that initial meeting. So it's the middle of the afternoon, and I am on my way to another meeting, and I'm thinking very deeply about the second step. So the second step says, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves can restore us to sanity. And I thought, okay, I don't really know what that power is. I'd been raised sort of nominally Christian, but I didn't really I went through an atheist period in university, as I think many people do, because
Mhm.
we're just sort of trained, the school system just trains you to think, well, reason is the only thing there is, right? Well,
Yeah.
it's not super valid, right? There's lots of other ways of knowing, but you usually have to go through something terrible first to realize that. So I'm thinking very deeply about what this higher power might be. And so I'm also super early for this meeting, and I'm in an unfamiliar neighborhood, and I've decided, I'm like, okay, I'm going to try and find some lunch. So I'm walking through this neighborhood looking for the church and looking for a restaurant, and I see this restaurant, and I look up to the restaurant sign, and the restaurant is called The Second Step.
I love it. That's
So I thought, oh, how appropriate. And I came up to the window of the restaurant. I thought, I'll just look inside. And who's in there but a bunch of old alcoholics, the kind that are drinking dollar draft at the bar with their missing teeth, and just like old men at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And I thought, maybe that's not the best place for me to have lunch. So I thought, fine, I'm going to just carry on up the street towards the church. And I wind up walking down a residential street. And on this residential street, there's these two drunk guys sitting on a porch. They're like, hey, baby, why don't you come and drink this beer with us? And I thought, what a strange thing to happen. If this was the week before, I would have drank the beer, but I never would have hung out with those guys.
uh-huh.
I'll take the beer, but bye.
Take it to go.
Take it to go, exactly. But I just thought, wow, what an odd thing to happen. And I also thought, as I walked up the street, I'm like, I don't want to have to deal with any more like street harassment nonsense. So I managed to find a little bit of lunch in this grocery store that was really close to the church. And I thought, because I don't want to have to deal with anybody or talk, I'm going to hide myself away on the street so that nobody can find me. And I found this perfect spot. And the perfect spot was right beside this building, and there's like a little curb and this big bush. And so if I tuck myself behind the bush on this curb, no one can see me from the street. And I thought, this is the perfect spot. So I begin to eat my salad or whatever. And in a moment or two, a man comes up on his bicycle. I remember being like about eye level with this great big tire that suddenly appears in front of me. And the guy goes, hey, baby, I saw you walking down the street and I thought I'd just like come over here and try to get to know you or whatever. And I was just like, ugh, this is the exact experience I was hoping to avoid by hiding myself behind this bush. I was like, guy, I'm on my way to an AA meeting. So like, you can just take a hike, basically. He didn't really take the hint of that. And he said, oh, are you an alcoholic? And I said, I guess. And he said, oh, isn't that funny? Because sometimes people tell me that I have a message for them or that I'm some kind of an angel. And I said, really? What kind of message do you have for me today, angel? And I said it super sarcastically to him, just like so mean. And he says, well, I don't know, maybe you should quit drinking or something. You know, my brother's an alcoholic and he lives in my parents' basement and he's ruining his life and he's ruining my parents' lives and it's so terrible and blah, 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 blah. And the guy just starts to talk and I thought, all right, well, fine. I'm stuck here. I might as well just talk to him. So I'm like, well, what are you doing here in the middle of the afternoon on your bike? Don't you have a job? Like, so I just started to chat. At one point during the conversation, I looked up to the man's eye, and this is the part of the story that's so very difficult to explain. I don't have any appropriate words for this experience. I really can't describe any of it with accuracy, but I'm going to try to explain what happened. So I look up to this man's little light brown eye, and I somehow become aware of, for lack of a better word, incredible presence. It was not something visual or auditory or physical. It was sort of like a multitude and kind of like a unity, but also neither of those things and much greater than that at the same time. And it was so terribly beautiful. The most exceptional. We have the word beauty here on earth, but it's multiply the word beautiful out by infinity. So extraordinary in every possible way. It had like an unfathomable majesty. That's a close word, I guess, but a million times better than that. And powerful, the kind of power human beings, we think we have power. We're like, oh, we have nuclear power. We could blow up the earth 100 times. Like, nothing. That's nothing in comparison. There was kind of an electrical feeling to it, and a feeling also that the boundaries of my consciousness were being expanded in a way that I can't describe. Probably doesn't even make sense to say something like that, but that's really how it felt. An unfathomable size, like if you pasted like 25,000 skies together, it wouldn't even be close. It could it have been infinite? Maybe, but your brain can only take so much, right?
Yeah.
So everything about it is totally unrecognizable in every way, but so magnificent. We have ideas about the word holy here on earth. This is where that word comes from. And what we have here is, it's like it says in the Bible about things being a shadow or a copy of things in the heavenly places. This is the original sacredness, and it makes you just want to worship, just worship. And also, I recognized in that moment my own abasement and my own absolutely pitiable wretchedness, like classical wretchedness.
Wow.
But what was so remarkable about this incredibly, beautifully, unfathomably majestic, powerful, possibly infinite, unable to put a number on it kind of presence, the only thing that was recognizable about this presence was that it was having an emotion,
Hmm.
and the emotion was directed towards me. And the emotion was kind of like this. For those of you that have kids or maybe little pets, think of when your little kid was just small, like a toddler, or if it's pets, like a little kitten or a little puppy. And when that little thing looks up at you, sometimes you would look down on it and you would laugh from sheer joy and delight about it. Oh, it just delights you in its
I
being.
love that.
And that was the emotion that was coming from that great presence, despite my abundant wretchedness and its great glory. It's so benevolent and so delicate, despite its great power. There's a delicacy, an extraordinary tenderness. It was the most I mean, these words are all, it's actually much better than that.
Right.
By like billions of times. It's about the best I can do to describe it, I think. We use the word awestruck here on earth to describe certain things, or right? But I was literally awestruck by this. There was no speaking, there was no thinking. By the time my brain was able to spit out, my brain was just gave me 3 words, eventually. What is this? And as I thought that, the moment faded away, and there I was on the curb with my salad in my hand, looking up at the man on the bicycle. And the man on the bicycle is looking back at me. And we just stare at each other in silence for a moment. And then he says, "Whoa, did you feel that?" And I was like, "Yes. Did you feel that?" And he's like, "Yeah, my hair's standing on end." And I was like, "Oh, my hair is standing on end too." And he's like, "What was that?" And I said, I don't know. And I suddenly was like, "Oh, I have to go to my meeting." And he's like, "Well, can I get your number?" And I'm like, "No." And I picked myself up off the curb and I just rushed over to the church and I went to this meeting, which I remember very little about, except that I bought my big book that night. So I came home to the motel afterwards and I told my roommate what happened. And she's like, "Alison, you got to write that down." And I was like, "Oh, yeah, right. I got to write it down." So I took out my little diary and I wrote this experience down, everything that I could remember about it. Even just trying to put it in words was very difficult. Needless to say, I think of that presence as God, but our ideas about God are so constrained by what we're able to think. It's not even, some of the metaphors are incredibly useful. The metaphors are useful. It's like when Jesus gets baptized and they describe his baptism as the heavens opened. That's exactly what it's like.
Wow.
It's like the heavens opened.
Wow.
But it's not literal. It's metaphorical, but it's the most perfect possible metaphor for it. So I didn't drink because who needs to after something like that? Well, I'm better than that. There's no better experience. I was like, wow, you're really real? It's so miraculous. And I just felt like the luckiest person on earth to get this, like the luckiest person. I thought, what a treasure. So I just plodded along in my regular life and tried to get to know God better. And so perhaps a few months after this experience, after my roommate and I had moved into a little house and I'm still walking around in this relatively new neighborhood, I found that I would always walk by this one church. And the church had, churches often posted scripture outside. I must have walked by this place like 50 times, right? And I never really noticed what it said. But what it said was, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only son." And for the first time ever, I thought, we're so blessed. That great presence had a child who came here for us, for our benefit, to bridge that great gap in holiness for us, because we are not the same. There's like, yes, I guess we're related somehow, but like there's a distance. We need a bridge. And Jesus is that bridge, right? That's why the Bible talks about him being a gate for the sheep. He's the gate. It's totally legitimate, the whole thing. And I just thought, oh, wow, Jesus, that's who you are. Did you want to like hang out and stuff? That's what I said.
Do you want to be my friend?
Yeah, exactly. And so that's how I became a Christian. And I just devoured that book, Bible, just like I was like, give me this thing. And I just like ate it, right? As much as I possibly could. It was the most beautiful experience. And so now I've been sober a good long time.
That is amazing.
I could talk about it like all day, but it's so hard to describe.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And I can tell our words are so little compared to the feelings and the experience. And I love how I think it does help when you say your consciousness was expanded, because our human consciousness can't understand. I don't think we can comprehend God
No.
and his greatness unless you have an experience like that where it's expanded and you see differently for a
Yes,
moment.
I think that's true. It's like trying to explain to the fish in your fish tank about the street that you live on. The
Mm-hmm.
fish isn't going to understand you. You can use metaphors like when you swim by this rock, that's kind of what our house is like on the street, right? But the fish is never really going to get it because he can't see too far outside of his tank. So somehow the Lord took pity on this poor fish.
Yes, I think that's miraculous and amazing. I love your description of that presence seeing you as a toddler and loving you with all that joy and benevolence that a great being would feel towards you, someone who doesn't understand, someone who's a baby, an infant in our understanding, still
Yes.
could love and honor you. And I just love that imagery of that
Yes,
experience.
it's a delight.
Yes, that delight. I love that word.
Delight. The presence is full of delight, which is not a thing that really gets hit hard in church, right? They're like,
Mhm.
oh, God's righteous and God's holy and God's this and that. And it's all true. But he's also delighted. Like, oh, look at this lovely little creature. Oh, you're just so sweet and delightful.
I love that. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that imagery so much. So with your AA journey, did you continue to go, and was it much easier? Was it, because I know it's difficult for alcoholics to say, I'm done. It sounds like it was like after that experience. Was it easy? Was it hard? What was that journey like?
It was easy for me, really. I remember about a few months in, I had a moment where I was like, oh my gosh, a double Brian Ginger would be so good right now. And the thought just flew into my mind. And I was like, oh, that would be so great. And that's the first time that had happened. But I also know that from listening to what everybody said in those rooms, I'm like, when you have that thought, you need to pray and get your butt to a meeting. And so I prayed. I was like, Lord, help, basically. And not 10 minutes later, does a friend happen upon me? And I get in this conversation and I forget all about it.
I
And
love
that
it.
was the only time, which is lucky. But I did gain a lot of wisdom from those rooms. There's lots of incredibly spiritual people in those places. But eventually I had to go to church because I need the structure. There's so much value in our tradition because people have had these sorts of experiences for a couple of thousand years. And if you go through church history, there's real guidance there. There's just a fullness to life in the church. I love the church now. Oh my gosh, it's like my favorite place to be. Yeah.
I love it. So did you start going to that very church that the message was on, or a different one?
Didn't. It actually, after that moment, it took me a while to actually go to a church because the experience was so conceptual and different. It was just me and Jesus and the Bible for like a long time, a good few years. But then after a few years, I had some other like vaguely mystical things happen. And I was like, which happens now from time to time, nothing ever as big as that. But I've had a few moments here and there. I'm like, oh, I need guidance. So that's how I would go to a great big evangelical church, and also like a little tiny liturgical church at the same time. So I had a balance. And I went to Pentecostal churches, and I went to, like, name a church. I've been there. I've been to all
Tried
of
them
them.
all on. Uh-huh.
Yeah, I did try them all out. So at the moment, I'm an Anglican because it's got that beautiful tradition behind it. Also so much wisdom, and it just feels, but I'll go to any church. Orthodox church, gosh, so fascinating. Catholic church, fascinating, right? Evangelical churches, love those churches. Pentecostal churches, amazing, right? There's no wrong church, I don't think.
Which is I think that's a great mindset, because a lot of churches do preach that one is right, one is wrong. And, we can get in those weird battles sometimes that I don't think serve us well when we're followers of Christ.
So true. I mean, it's really fun to think about doctrine, and it's really fun to think about theology, but to get tuned up about it, I don't know. We can't understand it. How are we supposed to understand it? It's like a fish in that tank, right? It's like a fish arguing with the other fish about, like, what's really on the street. Come on.
I love that. I do. I love that. And I think your experience gives you that perspective.
Yes, so true. Teachers are beautiful.
Yes.
Right? I think there's something you can learn from, like, all.
I do too. I love that. Yeah. I do too. Yeah. Oh, Alison, what an amazing experience and story. And I am just happy for you that came into your life at the exact, really, I do feel like God orchestrated that whole thing for you to wake you up. Yes. Like you said, you were in that.
Like being under a spell.
Under a spell, yeah, to break that spell and to call you back is amazing and miraculous.
I really feel like everything that happened that afternoon was so anointed. Like every aspect of that, from the restaurant to, like, the guys on the street to the, like, stranger with his bike, right? Every time now I see a man drive by on a bike, it makes me think a little bit of that.
I love
moment,
it.
and I know that God's with me.
I love it. That's amazing. Well, thank you. I love this story, and I so appreciate you sharing it on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. When something like this happens, it's the best thing you could never imagine, but it's also a bit isolating because it doesn't happen to everybody, right?
Yeah.
So I'm always eager to hear those other stories, right? I love this podcast. I was super excited to come and tell this story.
Oh, good. Yay. I'm so happy. Thank you so much for listening to this miracle story. Please subscribe to my channel if you liked it. You can also find me on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify. And remember to notice and celebrate miracles